Welcome learners. We have been discussing from Block 3 Development of Tribals, from Unit 4 Empowerment of Tribals. We have been discussing about empowerment of tribals in the past few sessions, and in this session we are going to discuss the disempowerment process. The tribals are closely affected by different forces in their daily life, which correspondingly contribute to their disempowerment. Disempowerment can be understood in the context of appropriation and seizure of power. According to Zaxa, the disempowerment process of the tribes began with the incorporation of tribes with the larger social structure, especially the state. The attempt of the modern state to integrate the tribals into the so-called mainstream society led to the different form of exploitation and marginalization of tribals, correspondingly accentuated the disempowerment process in India. This nature of the Indian state offered the scope to the colonial anthropologist Verrier Elwin to advocate for complete isolation for tribals. According to him, it is the only mechanism to check the disempowerment of tribals by safeguarding and protecting their interest in different spheres. After independence, the so-called development projects of the state have turned out to be major factor for the disempowerment of tribals in India. The opening up of the large developmental projects has displaced thousands of tribals in different corners of the country. So, the marginalized groups have forced to bear the price of the national development. So, to put it differently, the vulnerable tribal communities, they have to sacrifice their interest for the sake of the nation's development. These developmental efforts of the state have altered the historic relationship of tribals with their source of livelihood such as land, water and forest. The modern nation state is consistently involved in the gradual erosion of tribal culture and tradition by imposing the outside culture on them. The discriminatory policies which are adopted by the state in relation to land and forest dilute the traditional management of community resources by the tribals in India, which leads to the disempowerment process. The state also changes its role in relation to tribal people over the period and fails to deal with the tribal issues more sensibly. The changing role of the state can be more visible by citing a couple of examples. The Indian state does not look at the tribal issues more sensibly. Sometimes it deschedules some of the categories from the ST list, and in this context, the case of Jodia tribe, who have been availing the benefits of preferences at the state level but not at the central level, can be demonstrated. Again, it has failed to come out with any white paper regarding the criteria to be included in ST list in India. The government of India has not recognized the tribal people of Puducherry as STs, though they have been supported by the strong ethnographic study. They have all the 5 characteristics required to be notified as ST under Article 342 of the Constitution: primitive traits, a distinct culture, shyness of contact with the public at large, geographical isolation, and social and economic backwardness. The tribal people of Puducherry continue to wait for recognition as STs. In addition, there are other factors which are playing an active role in the process of disempowerment of tribals in India. Recently, some of the militant organizations such as the Mayos have played an active role in diluting the idea of empowerment of the tribals. For instance, in the recent general election in Odisha, the Naxals had issued warning to boycott the general election in 2009. When the Mayos spread terror on election day, they disempower the very people they claim to fight for. So these aspects greatly undermine the political empowerment of the tribals in India. So these factors are playing an important role in the disempowerment process in India. Now let us look at what are the unresolved issues which has led to disempowerment. Firstly, when we talk about the deprivation of forest rights, forests and tribals have symbiotic relationship. Tribals continue to live in the forest areas, although in isolation, but in harmony with nature. Recognizing this dependency, the National Forest Policy of 1988 stipulated that all agencies responsible for forest management should ensure that the tribal people are closely associated with the regeneration, plantations, development and harvesting of forests so as to provide them gainful employment. Despite these special safeguards, tribals continue to struggle for mere survival as they face formidable problems such as possession of land, house with no rights, restrictions in the collection of minor forest produce, exploitation by middlemen, displacement from national parks and wild sanctuaries, lack of any development in forest villages, etc. The protection of rights of tribals in forest is the key to their amelioration. Now next is the intellectual property rights. The tribal communities have a very close dependence on biological resources related to plants and animals, birds. Their livelihood and lifestyle often depends upon and is shaped up by these resources. Therefore, their survival and sustenance is intricately linked to conservation and utilization of these resources. If you look at the corporate protectionism in terms of patents and intellectual property rights arising out of various international treaties, instruments on trade and common property resources such as TRIPS under WTO represents a real threat to economic livelihood of these communities, as well as a source of potential exploitation of their resource base as biodiversity expressed in life forms and knowledge is sought to be converted into private property and treated as an open access system for free exploitation by those who want to privatize and patent it. There is an urgent need to provide appropriate legal and institutional arrangements for recognizing and acknowledging the rights of tribal communities to such resources and knowledge. Moving on to land alienation. Land is not only the most important productive resource base for the tribals, but also occupies an important place in their psyche as the mainstay of their social and religious practices. Over a period of time, this resource base of the tribal communities has tended to get eroded not only through acquisition for public purposes, but also through fraudulent transfers, forcible eviction, mortgages, leases and encroachments. Moving on to displacement of tribals. The rehabilitation of the displaced tribals is a serious problem which is yet to receive due attention. As documented by various research studies, only a small percentage of tribal Aussies could get the benefit of rehabilitation facilities. Aussies are the people, the tribal people who were removed from their residential place where they are living. A vast majority of tribal people displaced by big projects are pushed into a vortex of increasing asettledness, unemployment, debt bondage and destitution. Women and children among them are the worst affected. The payment of compensation in cash directly disempowers tribals as the exploiters in the area exhaust their money through various unproductive expenditure and fraudulent practices. Any loss of access to traditional sources of livelihood, namely land, forest, water, river, pasture, etc., marginalizes women more than men in the labor market. It is only when land and other sources are regained, the tribals in general and tribal women in particular be empowered. Now, talking about the migrant labour. Because of the low agricultural productivity, erosion of natural resource base, lack of employment opportunities, and increased restrictions on rights over forest produce, these all have forced the tribal labourers to migrate to other areas in search of wage employment. The migration of tribal communities takes place towards agriculturally prosperous states, industrial areas, or wherever temporary employment is available. The tribal labourers in these areas are subjected to exploitation by contractors and middlemen through practices such as inadequate wage payment, non-provision of basic amenities, and other violation of labour laws. Force is also exercised to retain them if they make attempts to leave the employment. Tribal women labourers are often subject to sexual exploitation, etc. Now, another important factor is the extinction of tribal culture. The principles of Panchsheel, specially adopted in the approach to tribal development, recognize the importance of tribal culture and their traditions. As pronounced in the second 5-year plan, welfare programs of scheduled tribes have to be based on respect and understanding of their culture and traditions, and also an appreciation of the social, psychological, and economic problems with which they are faced. So, preservation and promotion of tribal culture has become the prime concern in formulating various developmental programs for the well-being of the tribals. However, with accelerated development, tribals have been exposed, subjected to the rapid modernization and industrialization, bringing them into sudden contact with non-tribal culture and social mores, which have had deep influence on the tribal lifestyle and culture, positive as well as negative. Moving on to the another important factor is the extreme poverty level and the tribal unrest. The impact of various poverty alleviation programs put into action during the last 2 developmental decades has brought down the poverty levels among scheduled tribes. Still, the incidence of poverty among scheduled tribes continues to be very high, and at 51.14%, it is much higher when compared to 35.97% in respect of general categories during 93 to 94. Therefore, there has been increasing unrest among the tribals and in tribal areas in the recent past. Radical extremist movements are already operating in some parts of the country, the root cause for which is the perceived dissatisfaction with their existing conditions and failure to access benefits and facilities promised to them. There is an urgent need to critically review the approach and strategy of tribal protection and development of followed so far, to reorient, change it wherever needed to ensure flow of development benefits within a definite time frame and restore their faith in the capability of the government to deliver. Now, another important factor is crimes and atrocities against scheduled tribes. Despite the enactment and enforcement of 2 special laws, namely Protection of Civil Rights Act of 1955 and the SCs and STs Prevention of Atrocities Act of 1989 and the Indian Penal Code and other laws, legal provisions existing for their protection, crimes, atrocities against the tribals, especially against women and children, continue to be very high. Also, a large number of crimes committed against STs remain unreported because of their isolation and their reluctance due to fear and apathy of the enforcement machinery. Tribals are most harassed by judicial processes when they are involved in criminal civil cases which are alien to their system of conflict resolution and drag on for years and sap their energy, resources and erode their self-confidence and morale. Appropriate alternative arrangements for disposal of cases arising out of not very serious offences locally with the help of community and without the aid of lawyers and formal court need to be evolved. The last important factor is the ineffective implementation of the tribal subplan. The special strategy of tribal subplan has been under implementation since 1975, both at the central and state levels, with the objective of ensuring that the benefits from various developmental sectors do not bypass scheduled tribes, and accordingly funds in population proportion are earmarked for the development of STs. There are only 18 central ministries, departments and 23 states UTs which are earmarking the funds for tribal subplan. The strategy of tribal subplan as it is implemented has also become very routinized. Its impact on improving the conditions of STs has also declined. So now let us sum up what we have discussed in this unit so far. This unit started with the understanding of the concept of empowerment in general and then moved to grasp the idea in terms of social work perspective. And this unit also explored different factors that are responsible for the empowerment as well as disempowerment of the tribals in India. This unit also looked at the different roles of the state and the different context in relation to tribal society in India. We also understand that disempowerment process is pulling back the empowerment process. The major factors leading to disempowerment of tribals such as deprivation of forest rights, intellectual property rights, land alienation, displacement of tribals, migrant labour, extinction of tribal culture, extreme poverty, tribal unrest, crimes, atrocities against tribals, ineffective implementation of tribal subplan. So all these factors just now we have discussed in detail in this unit. For comprehensive empowerment of scheduled tribes, the Constitution of India has adopted a number of legal as well as statutory provisions which are primarily designed to empower the marginalized groups such as the tribals. These commendable provisions along with other developmental plans and projects have no doubt been able to empower the tribals but not have been able to bring about the required qualitative change in the life of the tribals in India. In other words, the different provisions of the Indian Constitution which are primarily designed for the development and empowerment of the tribals have failed to achieve their objectives. After more than 5 decades of the working of the Indian Constitution, the tribals are still struggling for their empowerment in the context of their rights. The tribals of the different parts are consistently protesting against their land alienation in order to live with dignity. The contemporary struggle of the tribals in India is basically one for empowerment. The modern welfare state has failed to empower them in terms of their relationship with the natural resources. So the biggest challenge for the welfare state is to translate the different constitutional provisions and developmental plans and projects into reality. So this which will accentuate the empowerment process of the tribals in India. So learners, hope you would have understood this unit in detail. We have discussed both empowerment and disempowerment in this session. Hope to meet you in the next session. Thank you.